Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday gathering at the storehouse. Glad to be here once again and very happy that you're still listening. In fact, thank you for so many listening to our broadcast from last week. Seems that more and more people are starting to get interested in what we have to say, and we welcome you here to the show. Tony's with me again today, and he's got some very interesting things to say. Good morning, Tone.
Good morning, Dad. I'm just been going through the weekly news, and there's one thing I want to mention before we get started on the Middle East news, and that is the shooting, the apparent shooting that took place in Oregon at the college. It's making international news, of course, and I haven't gotten to see too much on it, but it has all these same characteristics as the false flag events that we've been seeing. Sandy Hook, if anyone has seen the evidence of that, it's astounding, and I find it's undeniable that the people that perpetrated it, meaning our government, knew that all the holes would be poked in it. It was just, there was no way this was pulled off in order to convince people that it really happened. No dead bodies. Nothing. It's an absolute hoax. The Sandy Hook shooting was a hoax. Nobody got killed. Nobody did anything. Now, I don't know if Oregon, if anyone got killed in that. I don't know the details. All I know is it has all these peculiarities. And it just made me think as I was reading this stuff and looking at it that, my goodness, all my life, none of this ever happened. Now, what's the cause, really? Are there suddenly more guns available? Well, no. Actually, there's much more gun control laws in effect now than there was when I was young. Are there more? They say these people, they're always mentally disturbed or on some sort of medication, right? So, okay, is there more drugs now? Well, no. I remember when I was in 7th grade, the first time I saw someone offer on the school grounds Black Beauties, which are a methamphetamine pill that was popular in the 80s. There were Quaaludes back then. There was Angel Dust back then. There was no shortage of drugs to get yourself screwed up on. So I don't think it could be that suddenly there's more drugs. Suddenly what? What is all of a sudden that people are going into these mentally ill people who are on medication somehow get a handgun and go kill people or get themselves a gun. And it's interesting how they're framing the whole discussion as to be a gun control. And all the alternative news are trying to paint this as false flags so they can get gun control. But that doesn't make any sense to me. They don't need false flags to change laws. They've been doing it since the United States began. Think of the Federal Reserve. Think of the incorporation of the United States. Think of the tax codes that let the ultra-rich pay nothing. Think of the medical system that puts all the power into the hands of the pharmaceuticals. All of these things, we know how they do it. All they got to do is piggyback an unpopular bill in with a popular bill, and they get it passed. They don't need to raise attention like this. If anything, this just brings more speculation and investigation to the issue of gun control. They've got control of the guns. They've got control of the legislation. They don't need to pretend to kill people or actually kill people as a false flag to get gun control laws passed. I see this as all part of the story, the cover-up. So what does it mean? Either these things are really going on. People are just suddenly, like never before in history, walking into schools and shooting people. Even though we have more cameras now. We have more restrictions now on people. More laws about what you can and can't. Right? There's more in place now to prevent that sort of thing than there ever was. Right? There were a lot freer campuses when I was young if you wanted to sneak a gun in your backpack. So none of that has changed. Why are people suddenly going into schools and shooting people. Well, it makes for great media, doesn't it? The whole world can be caught up in this instead of the real issue of the day, which is the build-up to World War III, which nobody bothers to talk about except to keep spreading this absurd vision of what's going on in Syria, and what's going on with the refugees, and what's going on with Islam and the Muslims. You know, they're spreading this absolute fallacy, this delusion. And I suppose to cover that, so that nobody really can spend any time analyzing that situation, we've got all these very sensational things going on. Children shooting children. Boy, that keeps everybody all upset and discussing all these issues. And I have to say, I believe it all fits in this time of false flags and propagandized, wag the dog politics that's going on. None of it makes any sense. Our whole political system doesn't make any sense. The crooks that they give us now to vote on doesn't make any sense. The issues before us today don't make any sense because they're all lies. And so I'm just using this Oregon shooting as another opportunity that the government is so far gone. We are so close to whatever this next phase of history in which World War III is going to break out. And so how do you get all these people, these Westerners, to follow you into this genocide, except to just have everyone so distracted that when it happens, it seems unavoidable, as if no one suspects it. So, yeah, we'll have to do some more investigation on this Oregon shooting. You know, I lived in Oregon for several years, and it's just sad that if people died, if these sort of false flags necessarily take place by killing actual people instead of just like the terrorists on 9/11, you know, that all wound up alive in the Middle East. You know, no, those planes didn't fly into those buildings, Christians. Get that through your head. Aluminum projectiles do not penetrate steel structures ever. They blow up on the outside. So we know no jet airliners penetrated those buildings. So those people did not die. We already know the Arab hijackers don't exist. They didn't exist. And the ones that we claim exist are people that are still alive. So, I mean, I'm just, I'm trying to get all this into a bigger picture so that when we go through the news, when we go through what's going on, we're always in this context of reading between the lines. What's really going on? Why are they telling us all these absurd things? Why are they telling us? Why are they perpetrating these horrible false flag events? What are they trying to keep us distracted from, I think is what I'm getting at. What is the real issue? And I think the real issue is the fact that we're setting up the world for World War III to start over there in Syria. And we don't want any intelligent people to question it. We don't want it to be questioned. Well, wait a minute, like I was saying last week, you mean nobody expected Russia to come to the aid of their ally? Why not? Why didn't we expect Russia to come to the aid of their ally? Why wasn't that part of our strategy, knowing that at some point Russia's going to be called in by Assad, and when he comes in, that's going to create this scene? Why is it all reaction? So from several days ago, there's an article here. AP, I suppose, is Associated Press, where last week we went through AFP, which appears to be some sort of French press. To me, it's all the same. It all comes out of a central mouthpiece that sends out the stories that are to be picked up. We've been watching it for years in our own media. How is it all these separate companies that are in competition with each other, these media companies, they all carry the same stories every night, same top stories given in the same exact order, almost the same exact story with the same time given to each one? I mean, is that even possible? Is it even possible to imagine that these competitive companies find the same story to talk about every day at the same time, the same issue. I mean, it's not possible. Come on, you guys. And then when you look at the fact that it's all owned by the people who happen to fund our government, I mean, come on. Start getting something out of it. Otherwise, I don't know, quit wasting your time on this channel, because all I'm going to do is frustrate you with trying to uncover things that your mainstream media wants so nicely covered up for you. So here's this article about U.S. acts to open dialogue with Iran about Syria, Yemen crisis. Now, we went over it last week. This is a new article. This was an article in addition to the one we talked about last week, where we were looking to the people who we've been demonizing to help us out in Syria. I mean, right? This is how absurd it is. And this article just takes it one step further. John Kerry meeting with Iran, and apparently Iran's foreign minister, this guy Zarif, he took a big hit for shaking Obama's hand, or John Kerry's hand. He shook John Kerry's hand, and the people in that world were like, what are you shaking this idiot's hand, this lying devil? Why are you shaking his hand, right? So I see in it all this deeper, all of their strings are being pulled. We're coming to a genocidal World War III, and nobody's going to stop that, is what I see in all this. We are not going to talk. We are not going to talk like rational people. We are not going to expect anything. We're going to react until we're all destroying each other en masse. And so here we are again. I mean, I just find it hysterical that John Kerry is feeling the need to speak with Iran about the Syria and Yemen crisis. Isn't that a little bit like the Catholics talking to the Muslims about the Crusade crisis? I mean, is there anywhere to go with that dialogue except to say, hey, won't you guys just retreat and let us have our way? I mean, haven't we already, isn't that why we have the crusade? Because we've already decided we're not retreating and you're not getting your way? I mean, isn't that what Iran said from the beginning? And we had to put sanctions on them and demonize them? Who are we to, we're going to talk to Iran about what to do? And what would we expect them to do for us exactly? So I see this as all just setting it up. We're setting up Iran. Look, we tried to talk to them. Look, we've been trying to take the diplomatic way out, right? And what would the diplomatic way out be with the country you've been demonizing and putting under sanctions, and every one of your heads of state threatened to bomb them, and the that scumbag representative of AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, the whole internet's got him pointing out that, well, an Iranian submarine could go down, not come up. Who would know why? In other words, hey, we're ready to pull a false flag. We got to get in this war with Iran. All right, this is what our country has been saying for how long now? What would you expect Iran to say to us? Oh, yeah, let's talk. We trust you. Why wouldn't we trust you guys? So, I mean, it's absolutely absurd to me. So let's get to a little more of this stuff. You got this Business Insider. Too funny. I never even heard of these people before. Now they appear to be one of the official mouthpieces for what's going on in the world. I mean, this is just Business Insider, official mouthpiece. So here we are from the 2nd of October, just a couple of days ago. Business Insider by Pamela Engel. Quote, this is a major world event. The Syrian war is now fueling a global Cold War. Right? The Syrian war fueling a global Cold War. Now, of course, let's go back for 20 years and look about the discussion and see that everyone knew what type of quagmire was going to come out of all this. But we're approaching it now like it's just this oh no, look what's happening, because we just had to act in our righteous way to get Assad out of there. But of course, none of that makes any sense. This all started with the Arab Spring. It's got nothing to do with Assad. I mean, look at the bigger, back up for a minute, everybody. Look at the Arab Spring. What did we do? What was going on in the Middle of the East, 5 years ago? Right? Reasonable stability. The same kind of stability that had been there for many years. The stability that comes with puppet governments that we put in. Mubarak in Egypt. Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Jordan. Abdullah in Jordan. The Kingdom of Saud in Saudi Arabia. These are all puppet regimes that dance to the tune of the U.S. allies, right? So what did we do? We took out all these puppet regimes. That's an odd thing to do, isn't it? The only people that really keep a stability in the region for us, right? We know now that Saddam Hussein, that was a lie. There were no weapons of mass destruction. So why did we have to take out the person we put in, the person who we gave the military to, the person who we funded to go start a war for 8 years with Iran? Chemical weapons, I mean, all sorts of war crimes. And never once did we need to depose Saddam Hussein. No, we kept sending him more money and more weapons. Hey, we can't find too many scumbags to go kill like that. He's our man. He's our scumbag. He's willing to torture and slaughter and genocidally murder people. That's our kind of ruler. So we got one in Jordan, we got one in Egypt, we got one in Saudi Arabia, we got one in Iraq. And then all of a sudden we have an Arab Spring. And again, go look at what the world was saying, what a wonderful popular movement, how this was going to result in democracy. And look what our ministry was saying. Nope, false flag. This is going to result in complete destabilization and the rise of what we anticipated then would have been the Muslim Brotherhood. But they rebranded it, right? Now we got ISIS, which of course is nothing but a proxy army for the United States, just like Al-Qaeda was when we fought the Russians. Same thing happening again. And everybody seems to really know that knows anything about geopolitics and what's going on in the world right now. So, I mean, you just have to keep looking at all these stories as they fit this bigger picture. We went in there years ago now and disrupted the whole region to create ISIS, to create the vacuum, so that all these radicals wouldn't have some sort of reasonable authority that could stop them. And so now what? Now, I mean, so the point is we knew what was coming is what I'm trying to say. What is this sudden Syrian war, this sudden Cold War? And I love these Business Insider. Boy, they got beautiful graphics, let me tell you. You know, they know all the positions of everybody, all color-coded. You know, they got everybody in their place. It's very interesting. I wonder, what's the intelligence on the ground that knows all these things? The same sort of intelligence that doesn't know how to stop ISIS, the same sort of intelligence that couldn't have predicted that Russia would come in and what would happen because of it, right? No, none of those things matter. But they got tremendous intelligence when it comes to every square foot now of Syria, Lebanon. They know right where everybody is. Amazing, you know? They know where everybody is, and they just don't seem to be able to know where the people are that they want to stop, right? We were able to stop Libya. We were able to stop Afghanistan. We were able to stop Iraq. We were able to depose Mubarak, right? That wasn't so bad, but ISIS, right? Go back to, how many months has it been? Almost a year. They were a tiny band. I remember reading when it was approximately 3,000 people, right? How hard would that have been to throw a net over at that point? But no, now it's Russia's in the war. We're having to reach out to our, to Iran, whatever that means. I don't know how you even reach out to your enemy and imagine that you guys are telling each other the truth, right? How do I trust whatever my enemy tells me when I'm reaching, hey, we got to do something about Syria and Yemen. And Iran says, yeah, okay. How do I move forward with that? How do I know Iran is going to deal with me fairly? How do they know I'm going to deal with? How does the negotiation even get off the ground? Okay, so now, yeah, we got this major Cold War, because now Iraq, it says, is inviting Russia in to fight ISIS in Iraq. Isn't that interesting for a conflict of interest, right? You got now Russia being invited into Iraq to fight ISIS, right? Now, why would they do that? Okay. Why would Iraq do that? Well, when you consider Iraq's being controlled by someone that we designate, it's just, I mean, what I'm trying to get at is the news, the way I see it, Dad, is they're stirring the pot. Nobody's bothering to be rational. Nobody's bothering, which of course if they were rational they wouldn't have had to, none of this would be happening. So it's not rational. So you can't look at it that way, you guys. This isn't rational what's going on. So what's going on if it isn't this build up to Armageddon? What else could it be? Okay, so anyway, you got this article about Iraq being, asking Russia now for their help, which is putting them at odds now with us in Iraq. You've got an article from this Business Insider all the way back from September 11th. I just want to touch on the title. It says, "We just got the clearest sign yet that Russia doesn't really care about fighting ISIS in Syria." Now, of course, that's our new angle. Russia's bombing, but they're not bombing ISIS. They're bombing the rebels and helping prop up Assad, right? Now, well, isn't ISIS going after Assad? Why wouldn't Russia be bombing ISIS too? So all of this doesn't sound very rational either. If Russia's also bombing other anti-Assad forces, okay, there's our conflict of interest. But what has Russia got against ISIS? Especially when Russia knows ISIS is a proxy army for the United States. They've already pointed that out. So why wouldn't Russia be anxious to bomb ISIS? Unless the two were somehow, let's not say working together, let's just say both of their strings are being pulled, right? Russia's being told what to do, America's being told what to do. And right now, they're both being told not to hurt ISIS because America's funding them. And as I've pointed out, we need the threat of ISIS to get to World War III. You can't just go in there and take care of this, or there is no Armageddon right now. There is no, it doesn't make any sense. We're not at the end times then. It isn't time for the Messiah to return. It isn't time for the Jews to find a false Messiah. It isn't time for the build up to Armageddon. This is all just looks like it, but we're not really there. So I want to just sort of propose that it's one, from a Christian standpoint, it has to be one or the other. And for me, and for us, Dad, watching it all these years with the unsealing of Daniel and the three horns being uprooted and the rise of the little horn into a place of prominence and the modern push toward rebuilding the temple, the Orthodox Jews waiting for their Messiah, even the Jewish rabbi that had the dream that says, "I know who the Messiah is," and he says it's Jesus. All these things to me are setting up for this end time we've all been anticipating. It would be very odd if that just faded into the background of history to not emerge again till some other time. So that might be the case, but it seems for us, watching it all these years, that's the real issue right now. We're not just trying to fit history into some geopolitical scheme that we imagine is going on. We're trying to undermine the geopolitical cover stories and propaganda in light of the prophecy which we expect is actual and is happening. And so if the prophecy is happening, well, it means somehow the world forces have to be drawn together into, what the Bible calls the greatest, the greatest war ever, a war to end all wars, a time of trouble like never before on the earth. I mean, so if the prophecy's happening, that's what we're watching come about. So how? And so for me, that's the angle. I'm under the impression that, okay, the prophecy is most likely happening now. This appears to be the most substantial bit of evidence, is that the prophecy of Daniel, Revelation, these things are actually happening in front of us now, which means that this buildup looks like the one that's going to end in Armageddon, which means that all this stuff in front of us is not going to get settled. Obama with his talk, Kerry with his talk, isn't going to cut it. And so I'm proposing that these people know that Kerry knows very well that the plan has been to go to war with Iran for 30 years. Kerry knows very well, when he's talking to our enemy, his enemy, Iran, that Iran knows very well he's lying through his teeth and doesn't believe a word out of his mouth. And so how we can pretend in our media that this is all real without pointing these things out. Oh, Kerry's discussed. They're all trying to find a peaceful solution. Really, this is, as I'm pointing out quite often, this is our peace process that I've been watching most of my adult life. The peace process, right, from Camp David, all the way back from Camp David with Jimmy Carter. The peace process, which has resulted in more death, more sanctions, more coups, more military buildup, right? More terrorism year in and year out. This is the peace process because America, with all of its money, all of its influence in the world, is leading the peace process. But of course, these people, they just don't want peace, right? They don't want freedom. They just don't want a peaceful world. I mean, that's what we've been, that's what we have to believe now after all these years. And so it's taken me a lot of years to get underneath the story and realize, well, yeah, when you misrepresent the Muslim position, when you misrepresent the human condition, when you imagine that all these Syrians aren't just normal human beings like the rest of us, in fact, most of them are far more human than Americans and Canadians and Australians and this Western culture of plastic money slaves, propagandized, dumbed down idiots that is our culture. I mean, these people actually have a culture that's quite connected to their roots, quite connected to something more historical and substantial, right? And so what are they rejecting? Freedom or debt slavery? Banker, NATO, military, fascist, communist rule, because that's what we really have. We call it capitalism, but as someone recently pointed out very smartly, it's much closer to communism than anything else. It's this small group of people ruling everything, owning everything, keeping everything, and giving the people what they want to give them. That's not even really fascism, that's communism, but we are a type of communist fascism for sure. And it's pretty easy to see that people like Syria, Libya, Venezuela, they don't want that fascist communist way in their world. The central, people of our modern society, because we don't talk about it in our, what we call our journalism, which is such a lie. It's a propaganda machine. There's no such thing as journalism. Journalism might point out what we did in Central and South America. How many of these freely elected people we deposed and killed, and to put puppet regimes in there of tyrants, people that ruled the way Saddam Hussein ruled. He was our puppet. He wasn't the Iraqi people's choice. But now, when we get to Syria and Bashar al-Assad, Well, son of a gun, he actually is the people's choice. They just had an election, and he was overwhelmingly elected. And many of the international agencies did not condemn. They did not condemn the Syrian election as the way they condemned, say, the election of Bush and Gore. Like everybody knew that was a setup. Everybody knew Gore had the election stolen, right? So do we talk about that? No, the whole international community looked at the Syrian election and said that was just as fair as any other election, and they overwhelmingly elected Bashar al-Assad. So who are we to go pretend that he must step down? It's such an absurd. You have to look at what is this deeper play. Something I've noticed in these articles, that because I want to switch gears here to this thing where Armageddon's coming, and how are all these people leading their people to this great war when it would be much easier to settle it, right? It would just be much easier. All of this refugee crisis, as we know, has been caused by our war on Syria. It wasn't caused by Syrians fleeing Bashar al-Assad. It was not. That's a lie. It was caused by this war. So we are causing this. And all of this disruption in the Middle East over the last 15 years, essentially, 13 years, we are causing this. And so if you don't look at that, you can't catch up just reading these articles. So now I want to throw something out there as I'm reading these articles. Isn't it funny? I'm looking at this, another Business Insider one from October 2nd by Natasha Bertrand, titled, "Shut Out. Turkey finds itself in a very difficult position with the Russian moves in Syria." So now Turkey's caught in the middle, because Turkey's been supplying these rebels, and now Russia's bombing them. So now they're at a conflict of interest. And without getting, to me, all of that is being perpetrated on purpose. We need a conflict of interest, or we can't have a war. No, we can't just have rational people going, well, hey, let's talk about this, because then you can't have a genocidal Armageddon, can you? So now look at these people that are doing this talking. I'm looking at a picture of Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, and someone who essentially sees himself as on the opposite side of a cultural boundary. Drogan, right? He's got nothing in common with Putin. Nothing. They don't like each other. Culturally, they're at odds. They have nothing in common as a cultural, as human beings. Only their humanness is the only thing they have in common, right? But everything from the way they were brought up to the food they eat is different. And yet what I find astounding is all these people dress exactly the same. Exactly. These two men look like they went to the same store to get their stiff white collared shirts and their shiny jackets and ties. And even though Drogan's wearing a red one and Putin's wearing a blue one, they both got little whites. They look like clones that were dressed in the same place, right? And then when I see the picture of Obama talking to Putin, son of a gun, same thing. They both look like they dressed in the same shop. And then I look at Putin talking to Iraq's prime minister, and they're both wearing the same suit. I find this interesting because look at Gaddafi. Did Gaddafi wear a suit and a tie? No, he didn't. He wore African clothing. Why? Well, he's an African. He's a Libyan. What does he need with a Western-style suit and a tie? What is China's president wearing a suit and a tie for? Where's that come from? Where's Russians? Where does this suit and tie come from? Funny, all your parliamentary governments, we've talked about that before. All the cancer that England, the imperial cancer that infested the world with its brilliant parliamentary system. All these governments that now produce clones that wear ties and work for bankers. And all the people of these places have gone nowhere in essentially 100 years? Nowhere but into serfdom. They all live the same, working for a few bankers who own everything in these countries, no matter what the culture was. It's Iraq. Oh, that's okay. The Iraqi president wears a suit, and all the people have nothing, and the Iraqi rich live like the super rich, just like Americans, funny enough, even though they apparently are on opposite sides of the cultural divide. Russia and Turkey, opposite sides of the cultural divide, but the politicians, they all get elected through parliamentary systems, they all wear suits, they all work for bankers. Isn't that interesting? I mean, you just think in one of these countries you might find someone like a Gaddafi who wears his own cultural clothing and exists on his own cultural context rather than this Western parliamentary. What makes a Russian president look like an American president? What makes them both look like an Iraqi president or a Turkish president? Right? I mean, I find this strange. What makes these guys feel like they need to put on a suit and a tie? Where did they grow up? What kind of cultural background has this Iraqi got that the way he wants to represent himself to his people is in a suit and a tie? And my conjecture is because he don't care about representing himself to his people. That's not who he's representing himself to. He's representing himself to the bankers that put him in power. And as I've pointed out, those bankers all descend from the same banking system. There is no other one. Yes, there is another one. It's called an Islamic system, a Sharia system, where they use gold and silver, and they don't use interest, and they don't, right? This is the Sharia system that Gaddafi wanted to maintain, that Iran wanted to maintain. Syria, of course, he wears a suit and a tie too, doesn't he? And what kind of banking is Syria on? Right? Isn't that funny? So I just find this all so darn interesting that there's so few people like the Afghans. You notice the Afghanis, they never wore a suit and a tie before we went to war with them. I'm not sure what the modern president's wearing, but the people that were representative of that political system before we went in and destroyed them, they didn't wear suits and ties. So you can almost look at it as it's a war against the suit and tie world, against anyone who isn't ready to put on that clown outfit, that slave outfit, that prisoner's outfit that says, I am a prisoner to the bankers. I will kill my own people for the bankers. I will sell out my country to the bankers, and I will give all of the profits to the bankers because they're the ones that put me here. I mean, that's what the suits and ties say to me now, after all these years. It doesn't say respectability at all. It says bought and paid for slave, prisoner, is what it says. And so I'm just saying, hey, Putin's the same kind of prisoner Obama is. And that's why they can have these crazy, irrational moves that threaten the whole world. And yet the people of these countries don't say, hey, wait a minute. We don't need to do this. We don't really have anything against Bashar al-Assad, right? We don't have anything against Putin. When's the last time Russia threatened us? Wait a minute. When's the last time China threatened us? Just last I checked, they were building all our crap. Last time I knew, 10 years ago, China was our buddy. All of a sudden, China's cyber attacking us? Why would they do that? Oh, they want to set up their own new monetary system. Haven't they seen what happens to everyone in the world that does that? Haven't they seen what happened to Russia 20 years ago? So, and of course, I don't really want to, I don't have all my facts straight, so I don't want to try and present the case yet. But I think it's going to come a reason here pretty soon where we're going to want to see where China comes from. What exactly happened to China? Who's in charge of China now? When did the emperorship end and why? And who ended it? What money went in there to take out the emperors and install a what? parliamentary government. Oh, wait a minute. I just want you to know, any country that has a parliamentary government is done. Bought and paid for. English colonial system. They're on the bank's payroll. They're part of the team. They're doing what they're told because the people wearing the tie at the top get their orders from the people who gave the money to put some schmuck at the top who wears a tie instead of his own cultural clothing, right? Because no real people of the country want to look like President Obama or James Cameron or any of these slaves to the banking system, right? Nobody in their country, in their cultural upbringing, wants to look like that anymore. Nobody does. Nobody. I just read a thing not long ago. America and Israel are the two most hated countries in the world. Hated. Okay? How'd that happen? We were loved after World War II. Loved! That's what we were told. Maybe they all hated us already. But we were told we were loved. How'd we go from loved to hated? You know, you'd think you're loved. You're the first superpower ever in the whole world now. You're the only unrivaled superpower that's ever lived. I mean, even the imperial English empire wasn't completely unrivaled in the sense that America after World War II was. There was just absolutely no rival. America could simply write the rules, and we did. Like I was opening the show with this, to think that they need to go kill people in a school to get gun legislation passed. That's absurd. They've been getting all sorts of legislation much more detrimental to America passed without such measures. Okay? So this is the real issue. Where does this part, when did China come into the game, and who told them to start a new financial system? This is what I want to know. Who are they partners with? Where'd China get all the money? And what makes them think that they can just ruin America when no other country's been allowed to do that? Nobody else gets to ruin America without being destroyed themselves. But China just suddenly thinks they're going to do that? And they're going to team up with Russia, who, as I keep saying, 20 years ago was dead broke. Who gave Russia the money? See, so I'm starting to see that this deeper world is the fact that the people who are pulling all the strings are pulling the strings to World War III. They're sending their different armies to get into position, and they're working the propaganda system to make it look like it's all just happening organically. Okay? So now you got Turkey being put in a bad spot. Again, apparently they didn't see that coming. Nobody was talking about this a couple of months ago. That, okay, we're going to arm some rebels. Okay, we're going to come from Turkey. Okay, Turkey and America are going to create a safe zone that they can't even keep ISIS from taking it from them. Nobody's talking about, hey, what's going to happen when Russia gets here? Since Assad's going to appeal to Russia, and Russia's got no reason but to come to his aid. But now that's going on, everybody's just surprised. There's a couple lines in these articles that I don't know if I can find them now. That's why I want to stay on the. You can read these things for yourself. It's all the same rhetoric. This one, where this one points out a Russian bombing campaign against rebels, including Turkey-backed rebel groups, however, now threatens to undermine Ankara's entire Syria policy. Now threatens to undermine. So, to me, this points out, Ankara's entire Syria policy was simply waiting to be undermined by the most obvious fact of all, that Russia would get involved on Syria's behalf. Nobody bothered to take that into their policy-making account, apparently. Okay, so now threatens to undermine Ankar's entire Syria policy, which has been predicated on bolstering anti-Assad rebels and establishing a safe zone for displaced Syrians. So their policy was predicated on bolstering anti-Assad rebels. In other words, nobody said, well, but that's not going to do any good once Russia gets involved. Is it? Is that the best policy? No, nobody. We're just going to catch up. Oh, now Russia's involved. Darn it, that undermines our whole policy. Isn't it funny how that keeps happening? It also precludes any possibility of Turkish intervention in the north. Again, none of that was discussed. But now, here we go, Turkey's out. So Turkey is shut out. Dr. Jonathan Chancer, Vice President of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, said in an interview, the Turks are struggling to understand the new rules of the game, much like the U.S. and others backing the Syrian opposition in its various forms. Again, is anyone feeling it with me? New rules of the game? That the only real ally that Syria has, who's got the greatest army in the world, apparently as big as America's? I mean, these are the new rules of the game that we didn't expect Syria to go to their ally Russia, who has the greatest army in the world, and say, hey, can you help us out with this? And Russia's going to say, yeah, sure, of course, that's what we have to do. Otherwise, we're going to lose our bases. We're going to lose our ports. We're going to lose our hold in that part of the world. So these are the new rules. Oh, Russia came in. Darn it. Oh, now we got to rethink all. Now, not only do we have to rethink all our policies, but all our policies up to date are now undermined. And again, think of it, people. That means not just policies, the money that went into the policies. The money to say, okay, let's send some of these guns to these rebels. Okay, let's fly some of this equipment into Turkey. Okay, let's move some of this equipment to these places for a safe zone. All that money that me and other Americans have been paying in tax dollars has been undermined by the unbelievable tactical result of Syria saying, hey, Russia, can you come to our aid? And Russia going, well, yeah, that's what we got to do. Oh, darn it. Okay, well, there's all the money down the drain. And now the next line in this article is, the question now is whether Turkey would want to openly challenge Russia. Aha. Aha. To me, here we go. All the talk now, as you will see, has escalated simply in 1 week. It used to be, oh, geez, what are we going to do? Ooh, nobody saw that coming. And now it's like, okay, Russia's in the game, new rules. Is Turkey going to want to openly challenge Russia? We'll have to leave that on the table till next week. Now, what does Obama say? Russia action in Syria is recipe for disaster. Isn't that interesting? Recipe for disaster. Well, now, wait a minute. What kind of disaster, and why didn't anyone see that ingredient coming into the recipe? Yeah, I mean, am I the only one that's seeing it this way? That it doesn't make any sense? Recipe for, well, why did we get involved in there? Not anticipating this recipe for disaster. And what do we mean by disaster? A war with Russia? I mean, is that right? Is that what's coming into view now as this disaster? So how do you reconcile these pieces of the puzzle is what I've been trying to do all week in my mind, looking at this stuff and watching it. Every day is a new sensationalism. Every day is, the problem never gets a little bit easier or the solution getting a little bit clearer, but no, disaster. What do we do now? Open aggression. I mean, it just keeps escalating. With the only avenue that escalation leads is to what? Disaster. Disaster is at the other end of this narrative. And yet nobody is, Obama's not standing there saying, well, wait a minute now, we're not going to let disaster come out of this. We will have to negotiate a settlement. But of course, that would have been the rational thing to do long before, wouldn't it? Wouldn't you think that if you even anticipated, well, geez, Russia's Syria's biggest ally. If we were to take moves against Assad, does any of our strategists imagine that Russia might be called in to help? Should we consider now, this is months ago, what might happen if Russia were to come to Syria's aid? Should we perhaps include Russia in the discussion now? Should we sit down with Russia and Iran now and say, you know, we feel compelled to do something about the Syrian regime, and we know that he's going to feel compelled to call on his allies. And so, because we want to avoid a recipe for disaster a year down the road, why don't we get it all out on the table now, Russia, Iran, China, Syria? Look, our interests are that we either get Assad out of there or we are able to get some sort of humanitarian, whatever our propagandized version of humanitarian issues, whatever that was. Okay, Russia, you guys are going to have to help us to avoid disaster. You're going to have to put sanctions on Assad. You're going to have to join us in minimizing this guy's the damage that leaving this tyrant in place, going with the official narrative. But I mean, wouldn't it have been the time to do that before we start sending money to rebels from Turkey that are going to turn out to be nothing? In other words, not only nothing, but waste of life, right? Remember the last time that we talked a few weeks ago when our safe zone that we declared was routed? The Free Syrian rebels were routed? Well, to me that means killed. People were killed. And guns were confiscated by ISIS. People were slaughtered and guns were confiscated. And why did that happen? You mean because the U.S. didn't have significant strategy sufficient to take into account what ISIS was capable of so that we wouldn't lose life and property? I mean, this is what's bothering me now, that even the official narrative wants me to believe that we're just throwing Band-Aids at what amounts to an open artery. Well, isn't that both wasteful and stupid, right? In other words, we're not helping anything, but we're hurting ourselves. And do we just have the money to be thrown away like that? To in our economy and everything right now, is it not unacceptable that we just keep coming back to the table and say, oh yeah, we got routed over here, and now that Russia's involved, that's going to completely undermine our policy? Well, no, wait a minute. I'm a little bit upset that as Americans, I'm spending all this money on a military machine that doesn't even anticipate the most obvious strategies of our opponent, so that we would have already anticipated Russia. We would have already had moves in place to either, head Russia off at the pass, or we would have already made moves to talk to Russia about, hey, when we go in there now, we can't have you coming in and creating a recipe for disaster. But no, now we just declare it. Russia's action in Syria is a recipe for disaster. And which seems to me to say, what we're trying to say is, get ready for disaster. I mean, I don't see any other way out of this, that we're just building to this recipe for disaster. And nobody's proposing that there's another answer, that there really is an answer that doesn't have to be disastrous. And I think that The latest article from the refugees this week the last one that I paid attention to, Viktor Orban again from Hungary was in the news, and he's calling on the U.S. and rich Arab states and all these other people to take on some of these refugees, this army, as he calls it, crossing in and threatening Europe. And what I find kind of funny about it is, of course, Orban is about the last European country, Hungary, to be negatively affected by the refugee crisis, because none of the refugees apparently want to stay in his country. They just want to cross through Hungary. They don't want to stay there. There's not a lot of money in Hungary, and Hungary's attitude toward them is negative. And so they're saying, yeah, we don't want to be here, but we got to cross here to get to Germany, to get to Italy, to get to some of the countries where there is work and a more liberal stance. And so I find it interesting that they choose Hungary to be so adamant. He's the one that is talking as if all of Europe is threatened, and that, a country should decide if they don't want to be overrun by Muslims and all these sort of things, where his country's sort of the last one that has any of these threats on it. They're not going to be overrun by Muslims because the Muslims don't want to stay there. So if anything, Orban is faced with the opportunity to make money off this. Orban could be shuttling these people over to Germany and helping both Germany and the refugees and making something out of it, right? I don't doubt that a lot of these refugees that paid $1,500 a ticket to get on a little skiff, it's, and as I said several weeks ago when they showed the problem in Hungary, where they had a few thousand people sleeping at that train station waiting for the train that was then denied them. When they showed the video of these people had nice backpacks, nice shoes, nice clothes, nice blankets. These were not starving people with no money, I promise you. They don't give that stuff away at the border when you're heading out as a refugee. Last I checked, you have to buy that stuff. So these people have money in their pocket, and Orban was just told to take this hard line because all he was doing was shooting himself in the foot. They could have made money off these people. They could have, goodwill. There were so many things that Hungary stood to benefit from the refugee crisis by being the country that was one of the first to be in line to have to do something. And the something they might have done could have set sort of an example or a precedent that, hey, yeah, no problem. We knew this was coming, and we're not really threatened because we know they don't want to stay here. So look at how smart we are. We've set up this sort of staging ground where we can help organize. Hey, who's here that's just passing through? Who's here looking for asylum? Who's here needs to be fed? Let us help the rest of the world sort out this problem. Let us show you how smart and energetic and efficient Hungary is. Let us, we don't have to accept unlimited number of migrants. We're a sovereign nation, but we also don't have to play this hard line for no reason. So I believe all that is a setup. They need to sow the seeds of dissension. They need to sow the seeds of confrontation within their own people, which, of course, in Hungary has been very successful, as much of the Hungarian populace to feel some sort of sympathy and feel that they have some capability. Without deciding what that is exactly, most of the country seems to feel that they do have some capability to be a positive influence on the refugee crisis, not simply this hard line, creating more problems, creating more enmity, creating more future backlash, perhaps, throughout Europe. But I see that this is all part. I mean, for me, Dad, this is my perspective this week, is that I've really been trying to get to the bottom of how much of this stuff is just the same old stuff that always goes on. There's always the war cry in the world because it sells magazines. There's always the I don't know, the media is always crying wolf on one thing or another. Always, 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 because that's what sells magazines. I mean, it's why the weather report has become entertainment. Because it's boring to say, well, today's probably going to look a lot like yesterday. Nothing too extreme. Well, okay. If I get used to hearing that every day, well, the weather doesn't. I might leave during the commercials to go make myself a sandwich when the weather comes on, because I think, well, you know what, honey, it's probably going to look the same tomorrow as it did today. But boy, when the weather is a storm coming to kill you? Check back in 5 minutes. Oh boy, honey, we better not make a sandwich now. The weather might be coming to kill us. Snowstorm, hailstorm, flooding, ice caps are melting, right? I mean, as long as you can keep promoting sensationalism, well, you keep selling papers. Now, that is not new. That's not something that they just started doing as a supplement to the propaganda. That's always been part of it. So all these Christian sites that talk about the weather and come on, the weather's always been going on, and even Jesus said, "Don't be alarmed," right? You'll have earthquakes in diverse places and wars and rumors of wars, but don't be alarmed. It's just the beginning, right? Don't be alarmed. Why? I mean, I find that an interesting statement. Why did he say don't be alarmed rather than just move on to these are the beginning? No, he says don't be alarmed. Well, what have we got today? Alarm, 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 alarm. Everywhere is alarm. Jesus said don't be alarmed. It's just the beginning. In other words, don't take your eye off the ball because of wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes and volcanoes and things in diverse places. These are just the beginning of the birth pain. This just tells you it's starting to happen. But don't be alarmed at these things. And what's the media all about? The weather, the earthquakes, volcanoes, the refugees, Europe being overrun by the Muslims. I mean, the way I see it, that's just exactly what Jesus said. Don't be alarmed. And what is the mainstream media trying to do? Alarm, alarm, alarm. So what am I saying? I'm just saying this looks like what you would think would have to happen if you're going to get to Armageddon at some point in the next, what? We know that from the beginning of the tribulation, it's approximately 7 years. Tribulation doesn't seem to have started yet. At least the way we're watching for it. There's been no dead rise. There's been no rapture. The third horn hasn't been uprooted. There's no 7-year covenant. I guess at very least that's your timetable. The false deliverer will confirm a covenant with many for 7 years. That presumably will result in the Jews being able to build their temple again. So that hasn't happened. So we're not to the last 7 years. So Armageddon's at least 7+ years away. So this war is not happening next year, you guys. This is the wars and rumors of wars that is going to build up over 7 years, 8 years, 10 years to finally lead to Armageddon. And so I guess that's the dichotomy of what's going on right now that I'm trying to share. These things are all fake, what we're watching. Russia and Syria, recipe for disaster. That's all to lead us down the road of having to keep building up a military, having to keep preparing for disaster, avoiding disaster. But then, boy, oh boy, the hotter that keeps getting as you keep dancing around disaster, what does that mean when something a flashpoint happens, a mistake? This recipe, when the wrong ingredient finally does get thrown into the pot, right? The explosion can be quite extravagant. And so that's what I'm seeing is being set up. And their strings are all being pulled. They have to be, because the money all comes from the same place. I'm sorry, China and Russia were nothing after World War II. Nothing. Russia, I mean, after the 80s, was nothing but a looted, broke, no more military, nothing. So who are they suddenly in 20 years if they're not part of the group that's meant to bring about World War III? Because you need some army for our military-industrial complex to fight against. Who are we going to fight against? Syria? How long are they going to last? How long is it going to take us to defeat Syria? It's only because we're not in there right now. See? Because we can't be, or we would defeat Syria. But that's not where this one's going, is what I'm feeling in my heart. This is going to Armageddon. And if that's the case, then no, we're not going to defeat Syria yet. This has to keep building and building and building. And what I say, the underlying theme beyond all the hype is it has to build to the threat of Israel. And I think Europe. I think now that that's all going to be one and the same threat. That's how Europe and America and Israel can all jump in at the same moment and say, yes, we have to. Now we have to do something about this, because it's not just, oh, Israel's threatened. It's no, now the world is threatened. Now Europe is threatened. And I don't see any way for that to happen except to continue these false flags that have been going on for years. In America, it's never stopped. We're seeming that every few months we have to kill somebody in a school, something, atrocious. We need some atrocity to occur to keep everybody's mind on, in fear, so that we can imagine that some mouthpiece like Obama is keeping us safe from all this fear, from all the breakdown of services, from the breakdown of security, right? The truth is none of that is real. We are the breakdown in security in the world. We are the ones that either decide to make it secure or decide to put it at war. We are the ones. And when I say we, I don't just mean Obama. He's the strings that are being pulled, right? Which is this banking system. So I guess when I say we, I mean not the Muslims. Not the Muslims. The Muslims are the one being slaughtered. They're the ones being called out to be slaughtered now. Because that's what we know comes. We know that even in the Quran they get slaughtered. And we know that that's what's coming at Armageddon. Israel wants to slaughter all those Arabs. They're going to slaughter as many Arabs as they can, and set up their temple now in cooperation with their false Messiah. I mean, that's got to be what. Otherwise, we're not in the end times, Christians. I mean, just because Obama is not the Antichrist, that isn't the sign of the end times. Anti-Christian morality, anti-Christian legislation in America is not a sign of the end times. Jesus told the Jews there'll be wars and rumors of wars. Well, that we have. Jesus told the Jews there'll be earthquakes and famines in diverse places. Well, that we have. That's signs of the end times. Daniel said this little horn character, this prince that shall come, will confirm a covenant with many for 7 years. That's when you're at the end times. Right now, Obama being the Antichrist, a meteor coming. You really think a meteor is going to disrupt the whole world before the false Messiah is declared by the Jews? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Daniel sees a stone cut without hands that falls on the feet kingdom and destroys the whole image, and then that stone is set up in all the earth and reigns forever. Now, could that happen before the temple set up? Could that happen before the man of sin is revealed? I don't see how it could. Maybe some little meteor could hit, or false flag, so that we could all be on the fear and the anticipation. But the meteor that's the planet killer that this Puerto Rican prophet prophesied, and that all the Christians are talking about. And I'm wondering, it was supposed to come in September, right? Renee M. and Lynn Liaz and all these absurd mouthpiece Christian sites that are just there, just like Pat Robertson and all the big Christian organizations, right? Those guys all have Club of Rome affiliation, funny enough. And that, if you don't know, they're all getting their money from the same people the Jews are getting their money from, right? The same war for the crusade for the Holy Land. That's why all these Christians are ready to demonize Muslims and side with this state of Israel, even though the state of Israel appears to satisfy Revelation's prophecy of Jews that claim that they are Jews but are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. And the Muslims, on the other hand, know that the return of Jesus, the true Messiah of the Jews, will be the sign that they know is the sign of the end times and the return of their Imam Mahdi. Isn't that interesting? The main sign for them, for the Muslims, the return of Jesus, the rightful Messiah, the true Messiah of the Jews. So how is it that mainstream Christianity has the Muslims as terrorists and enemies, and Israel as the country we have to protect? That really is the deeper story. As a Christian, if you're not willing to face that question and really answer it, if all you're going to answer is the rhetoric, they're terrorists. Well, wait a minute now. What about the Mossad? Through deception thou shalt make war. What deception, Christians? What are the Mossad doing? Who are these Jews that claim to be Jews but are not, but are a synagogue of Satan? Who are the Ashkenazi Jews? Who is this state of Israel that Iran will not tolerate in that land, though they have no problem tolerating Jews for centuries in their country? Why? What is that story? And why doesn't Obama or any of our heads of state or any of our heads of Christian religion discuss these issues? Why is it so cut and dry that Iran is an enemy, Muslims are our enemy, they're the devil's religion, and Israel is our friend? How is that even possible? So anyway, Dad, to me, this is the issue that all of the watch that we're on, for me, it's illuminated the reality that, we come to this war because we've been completely hoodwinked. Christianity and the great Christian West, the Christian America, the Christian Europe, can't wait to slaughter the Muslims for Israel. That's your, through deception you will make war. Wow. You've set the Muslims up to be the terrorists by being the terrorists yourself. And now you've got the Christians, who the Quran says, in the end, the people who will be closest to you in love and affection, you Muslims, will call themselves Christians. So in their own Quran, they expect that in the very end, under their persecuted Dajjal, the false Messiah, that the people in the end that would be closest to them would be Christians. Why don't the Christians know that that's what their Quran says? Why do the Christians think their Quran has them chopping heads off of Christians, when that's not at all what the Quran does? But boy, if you look at the Talmud specifically not only undermines Jesus, but degrades, degenerates Jesus as any kind of historical person. And if he was simply a bastard. He was simply a false claimant. He was a liar. He was a blasphemer. And the Jews did the right thing to put him to death for his blasphemy. So that's the Jewish position on Jesus. That's not the Muslim position on Jesus. So I don't get it now. Now that I've sort of brought the whole story into the light for myself, Whoa, what are all... You mean there's not one Christian leader, not one great Christian leader of these millions of Christians in America that's on TV, there's not one that actually knows, that spent 5 minutes investigating the actual Muslim position? How could that be? Well, I'll tell you how that can be. Because they get a script. Because they're told, you want the support of the government, because that's who they get. You want the support of the Society for Jesus and all these institutions connected at the hip with government. You want the government to be on your side instead of against you, Pat Robertson or any of these mouthpiece Christian organizations. Well, then this is the line you toe. You don't help Christians turn away from their government. You don't point out to Christians how bad this parliamentary system, this joke that election is, this complete false and fraudulent excuse for a democracy, and all. You don't point that out to the Christians. You tell them how wonderful America is. You tell them how free America is. You show them how all the world is jealous of Christian America. Well, that's not true. The world hates Christian America. Why? See, and why are these Christian leaders not pointing out the facts to us? And so it's the same I'm pointing out as why Putin is doing what he's doing, because his strings are being pulled, because Turkey's strings are being pulled, because everybody's being told, here's what you're going to do, because the people don't matter. The people don't have a say, and they haven't had a say in any parliamentary system since it was invented. So that's the beauty of the parliamentary system. The people keep going to work as slaves. The parliamentary system keeps stealing all the resources for those that fund the parliamentary system. They keep reducing any of the rights, the actual rights of the people for freedoms to say, own weapons, rise against the government, speak against the government, form their own political parties to undermine the government with a new government. Say, hey, we don't like what you're doing. We're going to form our own party and start over. Yeah. Oh, you're free. Go ahead, try and do that. Right? Never mind that 80% of the population doesn't believe in our government or Obama or have any faith in the system. But we're going to take the 20% of blind, brainwashed, programmed television watchers that do and pretend that whoever they vote for is the majority of Americans. America voted for Obama. No, like 6% of the actual people that live in America, because the other 94% don't want him to represent them. That's the reality of our parliamentary system, so that you can pretend that the 15 or 20% that you brainwash are the ones that speak for all the people. So you say, oh, okay, well, I got 8% of the 15% and you got 7%, so our party is the unanimous majority of Americans want us to be in charge. No, the truth is that the unanimous majority of Americans don't want any of these people in there. That's why they don't vote for any of them. And because they know that their vote doesn't count, well, the parliamentary system works perfectly. It keeps the real people at home trying to figure out how to live a real life underneath the umbrella of a slavery system, of a master-slave system. And that is the system that the English perpetrated on the entire world. And they did it on purpose, because if you go back to what we've talked about and sometimes in our Bible study, the people who set up this system thought through Spinoza, through Calvin, later through Darwin, and biologically convinced that most of the people are dangerous, stupid, they're animals, they're unsavable, they're unhelpable, they're unteachable, they're just going to ruin everything for us blue bloods, us divinely inspired, the ones that God does love, the ones that biology smiles upon. The 90% only are threatening our world. Okay, so look at where your parliamentary system, your government system comes from, even in America, or especially in America, comes from this attitude. How do we control the masses so that they can't hurt us? Okay, so the masses have never had a voice. Their voice has never been wanted. And for a while, it's just been pretended. Oh, yes, of course, you vote and you have a say. But now it's becoming quite clear over history that that was all a lie, like all the rest of the lies. And so, as I've pointed out, the Christian right is actually one of the most cohesive groups in all of America. They are they represent practically all of that 20% of brainwashed, brain-dead, programmed, mindless morons that watch TV and do what their pastor tells them. Go to war and kill evil Muslims. Vote for President Obama because Americans are free and great. So anyway, Dad, I keep coming back to this because I don't know where else to go. There just is no way for me to prop up Christianity, except, as I always do, to say the only thing Christianity has going for it is Jesus Christ. They're the only ones that connect themselves with that name. But, well, I've used this for years, the example, so America connects itself with the name Constitution also. But does Barack Obama, does the Congress of the United States, do they live the Constitution? Is our government the representative of what the Constitution says? Come on, everybody knows that's not true. Our government's a representative of sort of a fascist, communist perspective of what the money and the because the communist represents the money then became corporations, and that's what makes it look fascist. But the corporations, of course, they're run by the money. They don't run it either. The money runs the corporations, and the corporations to return the money to the system, and it's a nice closed system that way. And so, this has always been the case. And so Christianity winds up the force being used by evil, for evil, in the name of Jesus. That's my position, and why Christians might think, gosh, he sure talks bad about Christians. But of course, I don't really talk bad about Christians, or I don't mean to, because I don't know what's in a person's heart. But Christianity and this mainstream movement of Obama's the Antichrist and the Muslims are our enemy and we need to go to war and we need to vote for we need to support our military. This is evil in the name of Jesus. That's my point of view. That's why I sort of sound so dichotomous, I suppose. I'm willing to praise the name of Jesus and then absolutely loathe what is done in the name of Jesus, and loathe the organizations that call themselves Christian. And so, anyway, that's how I see it, Dad. Is that it's the sad part and the reason Christ, I think, has to spit the church out of his mouth is it is the Christian church that allows Armageddon to happen. Funny enough, it's the Christian right wing in America that allows this military occupation, banker occupation, false government, genocidal murder of innocent people. It's the Christians that vote for that. So, sorry, Christians, but time to pull your head out and say no. Say no to this type of Christianity. And anyhow, it's not going to change anything, but it might change something for you on that day that Jesus comes to spit all these lukewarm Christians out of his mouth. Start standing for something. Start telling other Christians, hey, this is wrong. Muslims are not our enemy. They are not the devil's religion. Going to war is not right. Our government is not free. Right? These are all lies. And until Christians stand up and and become this group against that, well, there never will be another one, which is why Christians had to be conquered, and they have been. So anyway, Dad, that's my report for the week. Everybody have a nice time.
Well, that was quite a great report, Tony. Thank you very much. And we thank you for listening. And we ask that you remember this ministry in your prayers. This keeps coming to you because of the contributions that you're making. The Lord has always taken care of this ministry for 35 years, and He takes care of it through you. And so we ask you just keep it up until we see you again next week.